Hey, I'm Alan Firstenberg,
Hi, I'm Brad Nemer.
and we are Two Voice Devs.
Too.
Brad, great to have you with us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, so it is always great when we have new guest hosts on the show. First thing we like to do is to have you tell us a bit about yourself. How'd you get into development? How did you get here? What do you do?
Yeah, thank you. I'll try not to make this too long because it's not a direct path, but essentially
Well,
working
And,
backwards. It's
and
a
and the exciting part is it's great when they're not direct paths. One of the things we really do like to talk about are how it takes all sorts of people to do this work. So take whatever path you want.
cool. Well, I guess if I had to call myself something, we could say builder. Um, Not necessarily the same as trained computer scientist engineer, but and if I knew that you could do this in high school, earlier, I would have just gone straight to it if astronaut or pilot wasn't available. The other contenders, my Halloween costumes for years, um, but there wasn't a well-worn path to product management. I didn't know what it was, and so I pursued other things. I did political science, which is like physics of people, like how you understand or societies, I should say, how people work together or don't, and but always loved technology, and so I found my way through writing to marketing to product management, this thing called product management, which was uh, amazing because it's where you make stuff, you conceive of a thing, and then you don't do it by yourself. You work with a ton of other people, and those people are really interesting. So I just found this is the most magical job in the universe, at least for me. And I basically still do it, but the configuration of doing that in a small company with 5 people in the supercomputing industry versus, you know, tens of thousands of people in the mobile phone industry is day to day different, but the general idea is the same. It's what should we make and why, for whom, what do they need? And you always have constrained resources, no matter how big the company is, no matter how many countries you're operating in. You always have to make choices.
Mhm.
And product management is ultimately the art, more art than science, probably, of making good choices for the user. And then if there's no business, it doesn't matter. So I love that stuff. And so now lately, the funny thing is that brings us together is that I found my way to Noble Ackerson, who brought us together. I think he's been a frequent guest and friend of the show.
He's been on the show multiple times. Noble and I have done several Two Voiced of live appearances together. Noble and I have known each other for an incredible number of years now. And it's always fun for the two of us to debate. So when he suggested that I talk to you about some of this work, in a heartbeat, I trusted him.
Likewise, that was all I needed to hear. And, I'm thankful. Um, I found him by virtue of helping build part of the refresh for the AI product manager program at Udacity. He did also, but we were working in parallel. It wasn't until the end. It was kind of a launch party where we met and wanted to do what we could to help promote it. And in the course of it, really got interested in each other's ideas and just started talking about what more we could do together. We started talking about the kinds of questions that we were facing every day and that our peers in product and engineering were facing with regard to which model is the best. That's not a question everyone asks. There was a Super Bowl commercial for ChatGPT the other day, and that's all some people know. But to others deep in the industry, deeper than me, there's hundreds or thousands of models, and it's not a trivial question to choose the right one for your product.
And when I saw this blog post, um, one of the things that excited me the most about it was that you were going in and saying, there is no one answer to this. You need to figure out the answer. And I loved that because it's literally saying, use the right tool for the job. Don't just use the tool that you've got in front of you because it's really, really easy to use the tool that's in front of you. And every AI company is telling you, go use the tool in front of you. Go use our tool
Right. Exactly.
without trying to understand why you should pick one or the other.
Yeah, that's right. And also, they look like magic when you type something in, and we'll see some examples in just a second that they're captivating and they kind of, lure you in with very human sounding output, but that's not who they are. That's not what they're doing. And so, we don't always see everything our users do. We have to figure out how to systematically test for the broad range of inputs. You're
Mm.
going to get the broad range of outputs. And, and this is new stuff. So QA has been around a long time, but usually you can always test 2 + 2 = 4. And it's interesting to deal with these systems that are by design not going to do that.
It's really tough to talk about testing non-determinism, and maybe we'll talk about that some more now, and maybe, hopefully, we'll talk about it more in a future episode as well. One of the things I wanted to get to is, so you identify yourself as a product manager. What do you see a project manager as doing? What do you do?
So
That
you
wasn't meant
just
to be a trick question. I'm
no, yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah. No, no. I'm only drawing on it because I might have sounded or thought you said project manager, which is a distinct skill set that I don't possess. Those are the people in my mind who keep the trains running on time and can see around the corner to the three bottlenecks that might pop up if you don't do something today. You'll be sorry about it next week, 3 weeks, a quarter from now, and you won't meet your plans. And that's not me. I'm more of a product manager, and that is ultimately picking what we build and why and for whom.
Okay.
So you will, and that's why it's interesting because you have to be knowledgeable, but not doing all the things. So I'm almost always working through and with other people on the technical side, the marketing side, business side, data side, everything to bring these things to life. And that's why I love it because it's inherently multidisciplinary. But a typical question would be, say, let's just pick something. So let's even say we're talking about this blog software, right? So who is it for? We could say, I don't like this design. It's boring, right? What does boring mean? Well, it turns out it's for 5-year-olds. Is this the right design for 5-year-olds? I don't know. Can they read? Maybe, maybe not. Should it have an audio version instead? Should the audio version be in different languages or should it have giant buttons? Should there be dancing bears across it? I don't know exactly. We're just making this up. But based on who your user is and what they need to achieve or what you want them to be able to do, you might design something differently and you would have different priorities. You probably wouldn't put a link to X on it or maybe even Facebook. But you might have, a storage box for my favorite stories or something like that. And,
So how much do you feel you get into, I won't say the weed, but how much do you get into the technical issues that your engineers face as they're trying to achieve your vision?
that is a really good and revealing question. It's kind of like a Rorschach test that I found. I personally want to know everything, just about everything to the maybe not exactly to the library, but sometimes maybe. Because for me, computing is a medium and we're
Mhm.
building in the medium and you do your best with what you have. Or you stretch it or extend it or use a different medium. And I can't make those decisions well if I don't understand what it can do and what it takes to do it. Like, even if it takes, you know, if it's possible to go from 0 to 1, but it takes 6 years with plan A and plan B could get you there in a quarter or 2 weeks, but 10% of what you want, maybe that 10% is worth it if you can get it soon. Maybe not. Maybe you hover or you don't. Right. And so those are ultimately the questions. And I have found, at least in the context in which I've worked, you can't answer them as well as possible. You can't work as closely with the team. You can't be as useful to the team if you don't understand the dynamics. You don't have to be as good as they are at it, but you have to at least appreciate what they do and the challenges they're working with. And that's how I see it. I think that's also where Noble comes from, where he's in the code all the time.
I,
Technically, his job title wouldn't say do that, but he wants to understand it. I want to understand it. And that's what resonates
uh,
with us.
and then, that brings up two thoughts. One is that a common phrase from my boss is always, I don't want to micromanage, but I want to be micro informed. He wants to know all of the details.
Right.
And every so often he can toss an idea out, when I say that's not feasible right now, or I don't think we should do that, he trusts me, but he wants to have all the information to make those decisions.
Right.
Um, and second is, I think that's really what this article taps into, is saying, as a product manager, because I don't remember which one I said now. As a product manager, you do need to have all this information so that you you know what you can do. You need to have these sets of tools at your command so that you can help guide the engineers in, if not the right direction, the sorts of things that they need to explore.
Yeah. Maybe I love your perspective on this because you've also got a lot of experience in different engineering contexts. Early on, I read a book. Um, I don't remember who wrote it, but it was MIT Press. And it was kind of the classics of product management. It said, product manager is responsible for what we should build and why. And the engineering team is responsible for how.
Mm,
And the job of the product manager is to, again, define what we're building, for whom, why they need the thing they do. In many cases, they didn't say this, but motivate the team to appreciate the problem is important to solve and give some constraints. And then the engineers, you have to trust your team to understand that, go back, figure out the multiple ways you might be able to achieve it, and come back with trade offs, which the product manager can then choose between. And I think that's a healthy balance. Sometimes, there's more of some of the other in different teams. Sometimes someone's doing everything. I just heard a podcast where at OpenAI, it sounds like the developers, if they have the talent and ambition, they're highly empowered to try things in the design realm, which would, in a more classic organization, be a different team. And I think that's cool too. So if you have what it takes to prototype your idea and bring that out, why not? Why not contribute the ideas as well? So I'm not possessive about it, I should say.
and I think that's crucial is that, these roles are there's no line. There's a range, so you
Right.
might be less technical, whereas your engineers, you want them to at least know at least a little bit about why they're doing this.
Right. Right.
I'm gonna
I have to say that I'm on the far end of the spectrum, but I should disclaim that that's not the only way to be good at this. There are people with different personality types in different organizations with different strengths. And for them, it's not as critical for one reason or another to know the how the cereal is made. Say you're a brand manager for Cheerios, maybe not as critical to know all the inner workings of the factory, but you better know your market. And in
mm,
that case, the job is different. It's much more about understanding different dynamics of pricing, distribution, even package size can influence where you can be on the store shelf and all
sure,
those things.
but at the same time, to use the analogy, you still need to know at least a little bit about the manufacturing to know the ingredients that go into it, to know
Right.
maybe how the manufacturing process might help in the advertising. Is this something that you want to highlight
That's
in your
right. Is it
advertising?
organic? Is it
Is
shelf stable for
right.
10 years versus 2 weeks? And
Do we want to play up the fact that we're using, this new process that's, whatever. So I think that, again, coming back to it, I think that's what's interesting about this article and important about this article was that you're saying, here are tools that you as a product manager can now use to evaluate what your engineers are saying, more about these, these AI tools. And so let's kind of take a look at some of these tools that you as a product manager, and I guess by extension, you as an engineer also have to evaluate the tools. Because that's
yeah,
how I read the article. Was I kind of missed the fact that it said product managers at the top of
and that's actually, I think, in reality, how it's going to be at this era, this phase of the era of new AI stuff. It should be a conversation with the engineers rather than to
it.
engineers or from. I think this is going to be a conversation if it's going to be complete, because as you can see, so one of essentially in this post, what we do is we go through, say, four of the most prominent sources of information. This might change by the time we post it, right? It's very fast moving industry. It's really exciting because there's so much energy in the space. But you'll see a lot of these things are not, um, they're not self-serve. So for example, Hugging Face is an amazingly deep marketplace, not market in the sense that you have to buy it. A lot of these models are free to download, but place to find the latest models. And these aren't just the big name brands. These are, if you and I made a model, we can post to Hugging Face. And what's also cool is that there are evaluations that are run on Hugging Face. And evaluation, as you know, is a set of, let's call them all technical, though they could be qualitative, as we'll see in a second. They're they're measurements of how well the thing does on certain tests. And the tests are structured so that ideally you can run the same test on two different models and compare the results. And that's pretty much what you get. This is um, a snapshot of Hugging Face. Folks can go there live and see it themselves, but this is pretty raw. I cannot say that I'm an expert in exactly what constitutes the math level 5 raw evaluation or GPQA. If I were deep into it, I would have to learn these things depending on the needs of my product. But the point is, you can find them here and you can get very up to the minute because people are uploading these things by the hour and very broad range of comparisons, but it's highly technical. So this is not again, a quick, easy self-serve 5-minute exercise. This would be iterative, exploratory, and probably continual use of this kind of a tool.
Now, all of these metrics that they have here, somewhere on Hugging Face, I assume they're documented what they are and what they're
Sure.
good for. And okay,
Yeah, they are. And you can control which ones you care about the most. So here's the math one. You could say sort this column by math if that was the most important thing. Whereas if it was, um, say, accuracy, to some degree, that's a system thing with you might need a retrieval augmented generation RAG to make that work. It may not come from the model itself, maybe how you build your system, but there are other tests that could be self-contained and you'd rather have let's say translation. Language translation is something that's pretty structured, pretty standard to test for. And you could say that's the most important attribute in this thing we need right now. And you could add that column and sort it.
so Hugging Face is good at helping us with well-defined tests and metrics that are out there, are established, and that we can evaluate that we can evaluate models against.
Perfect. Perfect. Exactly. Well, very,
Okay.
very well said. On the other end of the spectrum is Chatbot Arena, which doesn't look that different because it's very basic web design, but it's really cool because this is all about human interpretation. So let me switch to it. And um, and since we're talking about, human interpretation, let's pick the most objective question on earth. What's the best pizza in New York City? So I love New York, but I'm not there now. So it's safe for me to ask this. Um, I might not be let back in, but you can type in a prompt. I typed what's the best pizza in New York City. And what's really neat is it'll run two randomly chosen models, A and B. You don't know which models they are. And as a human, you read them and you pick which one you like. Now, the good news is that it kind of sums up everything we see in it. The bad news is that it's not evident in the score what particular thing made you think this. Like, what if I just like bold text
Hmm.
better and that jumps out and I think, oh, that's obviously a better model, but it turns out that these are more accurate. Too bad. We're not capturing that in this voting. But let's just say for whatever reason, I think this one is better. I put B is better. It'll tell us which one it is. So Gemini,
Uh-huh.
you're a Google guy. Well done. And it beat Claude. Okay. And the sum of a ton of people doing this is a leaderboard. And so on one hand, you can see which ones people tend to like more. It's not, again, obvious why, but you can get some brute force ranking on that.
So one of the things I always found interesting about the chatbot arena is kind of its focus on obviously chatbots, but it focuses on really this kind of specific task about question answering, or how do we reply to a person
Hmm.
for one round of a conversation.
Right.
And I think it's kind of interesting that it just focuses on that one thing. And we've got a whole lot of solutions that end up being built around that notion.
It's true, actually. In a way, because chat is the way that these AI models are popularized, we personify them way too much. And we also think that's all they can do.
Right.
We're not doing document analysis. We're not doing sentiment analysis. We're just asking it a question, seeing what it says. And that is a small fraction of what you might use an LLM for. Is that what you mean?
That's part of it, but also and this, if you've hung around Noble for more than 15 minutes, you've heard him say large language models are not sources of truth.
Correct.
And yet, one of the things that consciously or unconsciously we're evaluating as part of Chatbot Arena is, do we perceive this as truth? Not is it truth, but do we perceive it as truth? And large language models are good at other things besides truth. They're good for natural language understanding. They're good, for intent analysis. And yet it doesn't capture
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's clear that we're very highly persuaded by smooth talking.
that.
And these things can do some smooth talking.
Yes.
And it's to our detriment that we take it hook, line, and sinker. It might be right, but we should trust and verify. And on that note, we can show something. What's neat about this also is that these folks are they're building other leaderboards. And here's another one that's about coding. Create a pizza rating website. This is Chatbot Arena, but the challenge they're posing is not, like we say, a Q&A, one round, but can you build something in code?
And this is specifically because we're seeing this done a lot more.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got one that's coming out with this looks like JavaScript. Okay. This doesn't look too bad.
I mean, we can at least behold the miracle, no matter what happens downstream and this crashes and burns again. It's still pretty amazing that this is where we are, that it generated something in code and then rendered it for free in just a few seconds after a way too insufficient prompt as to what, one might want in a finished product. So like as a new medium for creative development and product development, I'm really excited about this. Noble and I are going to be diving in deeper to this as a follow on, for our interests, and just try and learn more about this and help share it. But here you have the same thing,
Ooh,
A/B test. Um,
much snazzier.
Much snazzier. And interestingly, like it interpreted the question differently. One, make a pizza rating website. Rating is
Hmm.
done. Make a pizza rating website.
Add a
Time to
rating.
rate the
Yeah.
pizza. Yeah. So I don't even know if it's going to work. We don't have to waste our
Well,
time on
so
it. But
before you do that,
yeah,
I think the other interesting bit here is that both of them are showing an output, but they're also let you select so you can go look at the code. So let's take a look at the
right.
code for each of these.
Yeah. Great point. Let's see. So what do you see I am not a trained engineer. So what do you see when you look at these?
I mean, mostly I'm kind of looking at how is it trying to structure things. Um, and it's so one, well, the first thing that jumps out at me as interesting is that both of them immediately jump to using a specific library, and it's the
Hmm.
same specific library, React.
Right. Right.
And beyond that, I'd have to actually start digging into the code to look at it, more
Hmm.
clearly to see what is it doing, what is it trying to do, how did it approach it. So
Yeah.
we see the one on the right. We've got a lot of use state, which is pretty common for React. I'm not seeing the same sort of thing at a glance on the one on the left, but know, it's only displaying stuff. So interesting.
Hmm.
Um, I tell you, if I've got a vote though, again, we're gonna go over
You do have to vote.
style style versus substance. And I'd say the one on the right.
Color,
Yeah.
personality, add your first rating. Okay, right is better. Let's see. Excellent. Um, when I looked at the ratings, I saw Claude at the top. That's what I see. I've been using a bunch of different of these different tools for coding. Vercel has one, Replit has one. Certainly GitHub Copilot was one of the first, more of an
Mm.
assistant. And it seems that people like Claude the best at the moment, although there's the French open source Mistral. They did one called CodeStrol that's apparently quite good. I haven't used it. Have you had any experience
I
with
have
it?
not. I've heard good things about it, but I haven't used.
Yeah,
Interestingly, on this, I notice it's not telling us which one is which.
you're right. Let me see if we can find that. Oh, here we go. App Tinker versus Gemini.
I see there. Gemini loses in my
But it's not necessarily wrong, right? It's just different. You preferred it
right.
because of the color and the design.
Well, the color, the design, also, the fact that
Oh,
one
look.
is
Oh, we judged too soon. We didn't give Gemini full credit for the bonus pop-up.
oh,
Okay. So
interesting.
we were premature, but that's pretty neat. Anyway, regardless, there we go. So Gemini, too close to call.
No, I'll trash on Gemini. I do all the time.
It's an interesting new medium, and the head-to-head nature, the arena nature, is a pretty interesting, though again limited approach to evaluating these things.
I think what's important to understand though about these is, yeah, it's limited. Um, but it's again, it's one piece of your evaluation pie. You're not going to go into any project and say, I'm going to pick it based on just one of this criteria because that's the only criteria that's important to me.
Right.
You're going to look at it and say, is it important to me that it generates factual information, that it understands me? You're evaluating a whole bunch of criteria and you'll use this to help piece that together.
Actually, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up because one of the things that brought Noble and I together on this quest is that a lot of these things that are most important to a product person is it legal? Like, so there were cases, I'm working on a project for a major West Coast healthcare institution, trying to make a medical grade LLM that is, certain HIPAA compliant, technically, but also gives reasonable answers and knows when to say no and direct you to call the medical staff. And the best performing model at the time when we started that was Llama, which was great, open source, flexible, easy to host it. But the terms and conditions said, don't use it for medical.
Mhm.
And you could, I'm sure people play fast and loose with that at the prototype stage, but we're talking about deploying again with one of the major medical institutions in the world. We're not going to do that. And so it wasn't going to be apparent from any of these metrics. That's not on the
Mm.
list anymore. And so there are other considerations like we'll get to in just a second, because the one that's probably the best at the moment is called artificial analysis. And they bring in some of these other factors. That's what I like about it the most, is that you'll see things like quality, speed, and price. What's really great about it is, like you say, it's never one thing, it's the trade-offs. So you can see there's a whole bunch of these are different, some of the things we noted earlier, some of these objective tests, they're stack ranking all the models. But what's really great about it is quality versus price, which is more how a product person thinks. Engineers often think like this in terms of also performance, like say quality versus output speed.
Mhm.
Green is
Mm.
where you want to be. And so now it's really cool, right? Because now you say, well, I want something in this box, but still, is it legal? Don't know. Have to check it. But it's a really powerful tool for um, cutting to the chase. Because otherwise, looking at this list, not informative, right? The
Right.
colors don't mean anything.
But it also lets you say things like, here are three of the models that I'm evaluating, and they all fit into all my, they fit into my legal criteria. Legal is giving me approval for these three models and these three models only.
Right,
Now let me go look at the other things that I need to keep in mind. How much
right,
is this going to cost me annually? How
right,
quickly will it give me results? Do I care
right,
about how quickly it gives me results? Or am I, batch processing stuff overnight?
right,
What's important to me?
right, right. Exactly. And, you might care even price. Of course, everyone cares about price on some level, but if maybe you don't have a lot of output to ingest or output, but it has to be right.
Yeah.
So you'd be happy to pay a ton, in relative terms for quality. Even doesn't have to be fast, maybe a second or, 5 seconds or 10 seconds. If you're running this overnight, who cares? Take 20 seconds, whatever you need, but it better be right. And that's the kind of thing that um, you also have to just figure out for your product. There's no right answer. It depends. It's like what's best for what you need.
And it's great that this site lets you helps you to evaluate those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really nicely done. And then last but not least, the last, it's not really a site, it's a report, but there's an organization called Galileo that makes some tools. They did an in-depth study on hallucination, which is
Mm.
the area of most concern. So McKinsey's done studies on this. Every single study shows that business leaders, product leaders, everyone's most concerned about hallucination because if you can't believe in the results, it's a
Why
cool
do this?
party
Right.
trick, right? It just is not ready for prime time. And so this is what's good about it is that it's deep and it's rigorous and it's thoughtful and it explains why it comes to its conclusions. The downside is because it's not dynamic. It's old already. So a lot of these models are not the latest models. And so these folks had to do all the work and they will have to refresh it if we're to figure out, at this point in time, what the best one to use is. But I just wanted to call it out because they did a really nice job they do show, um, useful characteristics. Um, but because they had to do the heavy lift all by hand, or, or at least compile it, then it must be redone in order to be up to date.
This is interesting. That's a really interesting looking report that I hadn't seen before. I feel like I need to dive into a lot more detail about it. Because one of the things it looks like it's saying is it's evaluating how well they perform with at least what I consider to be better tasks for large language models, using
Mm,
an LLM as part of a RAG solution
right.
rather than trusting the output of the LLM itself.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's an excellent point, and that's right. And they're pretty hardcore. That the organization itself specializes in high quality.
And I feel like that's one of the things that as we do the evaluations ourselves, or as we rely on others to do some of these evaluations, we need to, keep those sorts of tasks in mind. It goes back to my criticism of Chatbot Arena. Chatbot Arena is fun and it's cool for what it is. But if I'm using an LLM to help, you know, take whatever the user has said and turn that into an instruction for a home automation system, Chatbot Arena is not helping a whole lot.
Mhm.
Whereas either my own evaluation or, looking at something like this that says, this is really good at understanding single sentences and turning them into function calls.
Right,
That's useful.
right, exactly. And also, this we're speaking in an era where there's just recently been a lot of commotion over DeepSeek, the emergence of a
Mm.
really interesting model that was superior. Well, let me take that word back. Really competitive in a lot of different dimensions. And here's where we can start to dive into it. So I'm doing this live, so forgive me if this is not 100% right, but like you would have been forgiven reading the headlines to think that it was number one on quality. For example, DeepSeek R1. Okay. Turns out it's not. If you believe these numbers, 89 versus 90. So that's pretty close. So you could say certainly it's competitive, but is it the best? If we're just going by these numbers, no. And then you'd say, is it
Well,
the fat that, right?
before we get off of that, I would even then look at that and say, okay, that's interesting. So we're comparing R1 against O1, O1 and
Right,
O3. So both of those are relatively
right,
recent other reasoning models.
right,
But then also Gemini 2 Pro, which is not a reasoning model,
right,
didn't do so much worse.
right,
And again, it goes back to what are our trade offs here?
right,
Now when we go look at quality versus price and we just evaluate
right,
those four,
right,
maybe that's worth it. Or
right.
we look and say, okay, you know, Google, and I know I'm the Google guy. You know, Google has its own reasoning model.
Right.
Where does it rank? How is, are new versions of it coming up? So interesting questions.
It
Okay.
is. It absolutely is. And it also shows again that we have to go behind the headline because uh, DeepSeek seems like a really cool team and they've done a lot of great work. And also the headlines oversimplified what they're good at, where they're not the same. So for example, on speed, very big difference.
Mm.
I don't know if that's through the API because I know they got hammered early on. They might have just not been prepared for the publicity. So, but in any case, very different number than any of the other uh, previously well-known models. And so you really have to pick what's right for you at the time for your product. That's really the continual punchline we keep coming back to.
It really is. But again, I think it's great that this is what the paper talks about. You're not just saying abstractly, this is what you need to think about it. You're saying, and here are some tools that you can use to do that evaluation.
Yeah, and please do. So please don't read this and call it a day. Please read this and play with these things extensively on the day you read it and afterwards because they change.
I was going to say on the day and the day after and the day
And the day
after
after,
that. And
exactly, exactly. It will not go out of style. There may be new models, but the principle of diving in will it's going to be there for pretty much ever because I don't think we ever. Well, our needs will change. We don't want to oversimplify. We don't want to assume that the headline tells us everything we need to know, and we need to get into the details to get the right answer.
You touched on quality assurance earlier, and let's touch on it again before we wrap up. A year ago, year and a half ago now at this point, I think I said that 2024 was going to be the year that we figure out how to actually test these things. I don't think we did. But where do you see testing and evaluation,
You
both
know,
of models in general and of a specific product? Where do you see that coming in?
yeah, on QA, I have tremendous appreciation for what I don't know, and this
I
is
am totally the same way.
and it is actually a very rapidly evolving state of art in the QA world. So there are gurus that I am learning from and study to get a better sense of what's possible. But I can see, even just as early as this morning, looking at some of the chatter on LinkedIn, that it is definitely a work in progress, even within the QA community,
Hmm.
how to deal with these LLM animals, because they do throw you for a loop when you're used to deterministic outputs and inputs, and it's not what you get. And also because, again, back to the seductive nature of a smooth talking AI, people will type in one or two things. What's the best pizza in New York? Get what looks like a compelling answer, possibly with completely wrong bullet points, but it looks good, right? Looks right. So getting through that is really the frontier from what I
And,
understand.
and this is why a lot of what I tend to push when I talk to people about using an LLM isn't in the use the LLM to give you an answer. It's use the LLM to understand the question, figure out the answer without the LLM, and then use the LLM to format it into a nice response. The rag, but think of that for everything. Um, that tends to be how I tend to push it. This way, you've got this middle chunk you can relatively easily test.
Right.
And these parts on the either side where it's a little harder, but it's also not as fatal. Anyway,
Yeah. That's a
no,
good
I
way of thinking
agree.
about it.
QA's tough. We're gonna have to return to that another time, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully I'll be smarter on it then, and we can get better gurus on it. But it is really, really important to, I think, get past the allure of a reasonable looking response. That's essentially the gist of it. That's what the industry is confronting. And people trust them, trust the first two responses at your peril.
So this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. Can you share with us the best way that folks can get a hold of you if they want to talk to you again about anything that we've talked about today?
Yeah, I'd love to. Probably LinkedIn is the easiest.
Okay.
And I will post, we can put my link and Noble's link in the podcast notes, I imagine.
So, yep, we'll have link to the article. Folks, we always welcome your feedback, your thoughts. What tools are you using to evaluate your tools? Feel free to comment below, catch up with us on LinkedIn, and join us again another time on Two Voice Devs.
Two.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.